Hey guys, hey, this is Anne Marie, and this is the AntiHR channel, and here's a story time. In this story time, I'm going to tell you about the time that I saved my bacon at a job by keeping receipts. And you know, I talk to you guys a lot about the importance of keeping records and documenting your work environment, and how important that is in terms of proving discrimination in your workplace, right? But the reality is that keeping receipts and putting things in writing is important when you are in a work environment for lots and lots of other reasons, not just for documenting discrimination at work. And so I'm going to give you an example of when that became really critical for me in a job. So I was working in a job where I was working in an organization. It was a nonprofit, and the organization was led by a person who worked at a major financial institution before forming this nonprofit. White male, educated at Ivy League or undergraduate and graduate Ivy League, and very elitist person. Everybody who worked in upper management alongside him were also Ivy League people. And this is the first time I had ever been surrounded by people that were Harvard and Yale and Princeton graduates. And I learned a lot. I learned about how elitist those people are, how much they think they're smarter and better than everybody else is one of the things I learned. And I also learned that they really aren't. That I came in there and I, intellectually speaking, never felt like that they were intellectually superior to me in any way, because they were not. And a lot of them, I actually, from a intellectual standpoint, could run circles around. And I also was, had mastered my subject matter, and I was hired to help them set up, structured operations, HR inside of the organization. They had none. So this person had started this nonprofit with all these connections that he had at all these major foundations in the country, like Rockefeller and Microsoft and others. And he had started this organization, but really didn't have any clue about how to properly manage all this money that they were given. And I'll be honest that there was a lot of mismanagement. Millions and millions of dollars had been given to them to do work, and they were kind of using the money however they wanted. That's just the truth. And that wasn't as big of an issue with these private, donations that they had gotten from, all these major and some smaller organizations. But when they hired me, they had hired me and told me they were actively pursuing getting a federal grant. And I explained to them in the interview that managing federal money was very different than managing money from, these bigger organizations, because the federal government has very strict rules about how the money has to be managed and how it has to be how spending has to be documented and all those things. So when you take federal money, it's a whole different can of worms than taking money from Microsoft or Rockefeller or some of these other organizations. And they said they understood that, they wanted me to help them make sure they had the right system set up, etc. So I get in here. Right away, I start getting pushback because, of course, they hire you and tell you that they want you to do certain things. But then when you start telling them what they're going to need to do differently, they don't want to do it, right? Because they want to spend the money however they want. And they don't, white people don't like it. As I've always said, white people do not like it when black people tell them what to do. And they especially don't like it when black women tell them what to do. And it was literally my job in this area to tell them what they should do and what they shouldn't do. So one of the biggest issues that came up was around timesheets. And one of the things that you have to do when you are dealing with federal money. At least that's the way it was when I was doing this. You know, there've been lots of changes, and this was when USAID still existed, etc. But you have to have timesheets, right? And you have to have a timesheet system in order to be able to show that the people who are charged against different projects, in fact, worked on those projects, and what their, you know, how much of their time was allocated. When I got there, they weren't using timesheets. Believe it or not, there was actually, they were not using timesheets. And one of the things I told them was that if they were going to be accepting federal money, we needed to get on a timesheet system, right? And I had identified a couple different ways, systems that they could use, automated systems, but that they need to get on timesheet. And I got a massive pushback from him, the person at the top of the organization, as well as all of his management. He had about 4 or 5 people reporting to him, and their titles were managing director, right? And none of them wanted to do timesheets. But I explained to them what would happen, what the consequences would be if they did not have timesheets, if they were audited. And when you have federal money, you have to have an audit every year. And so I explained to them this was not negotiable. And you couldn't just do timesheets for the federal money. You have to have a timesheet system for the company. So I told them they had to do timesheets. So he finally agreed, and he told the rest of them that they were going to have to do it, right? And I made sure that every time I communicated about these things, I put them in emails that I would not just address to him, but to the entire management team. And a lot of them would get irritated with me. They didn't like my long, detailed emails that I would send, but I would send them anyway, right? After, you know, dealing with this company I was managing not just their HR, but finance, grants and contracts. I was really doing everything, overseeing everything, and overseeing the people who were like managing this stuff. We agreed that they needed to hire a CFO. And I told you guys a story about how I hired this woman. She was white, and how she, you know, undermined me when she got in there. But I told you story time about that experience. But one of the things that happened when they hired her was she came in and also was raising questions about the fact that even though we had instituted a timesheet system, there were individual managing directors who were consistently not submitting their timesheets and not submitting them on time. And you have to, when you have a timesheet system, it has to be one that can be audited. And when the auditors came in, they were raising flags about this because, again, we had to have an audit that met federal government standards, right? And one of the things they were raising was the problem relevant to people like not submitting timesheets, sometimes for months. We had to go back and get timesheets for certain individuals. And I had told them in writing more than once that doing this could result in a negative finding on their federal audit, right? And that the ramifications of that could be significant, right? And the reason I kept throwing up these alarms was that at that time, there had been a major NGO, non-governmental organization, international one, a big one. I'm not going to say the name, but it was a major NGO that had completely lost. I think they were worth several $100 million. And because of mismanagement of a small grant in a small country, the federal government had pulled their funding. And when the federal government pulled their funding, all the other organizations like Microsoft and Rockefeller also pulled their funding, and they had to close their doors. This was a company that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and almost like within a couple of months, they stopped existing. Okay? And another organization came in and bought their assets, rebranded, and took over some of the projects that was left over. But this company stopped existing simply because they mismanaged some federal money. Okay? And that company had been our landlord before I helped them move into their first offices of their own. That company had been their landlord. And right after we moved out of their offices into our first office of our own, which is something I helped them. When I started working with this company, they had about 50 employees. When I left, they had close to 200. So I had helped them, worked with them to build the infrastructure to grow to that and accommodate that number of people. I helped them move into 2 different office spaces. I did a lot of work for them. I definitely left them in a way better position than when I had found them. But when they were at about 50 people, they were leasing space from this larger NGO. And this larger NGO ended up going out of business, basically, because they had mismanaged some federal money. So I kept reminding them of this organization and telling them, you know, this could be you if you don't take this seriously. And I said it verbally, and I put communications in writing because I was very concerned. My finance team kept ringing the alarm about the issue with several of the managing directors who were not submitting their timesheets timely. And then we had our first audit, and the auditors had raised issues about it as well. And there was a finding, they had given us a finding about it, but they had not yet received the federal money. The next year, they got the federal money. And again, Rose, said, you guys, we got to get, timesheets are due in the system. Everybody has to submit their timesheets. This is not just for the rank and file employees. Everybody, all of you have to submit your timesheet. And there were two people, white men, of course, who were consistently not submitting their timesheets on time. And one of them had been very vocal about the fact that he did not feel that we needed to do timesheets, and he didn't want to do them, right? And consistently, we're not submitting the timesheets. So then we hire a new CFO. She comes in. She now has to help them get ready for their first federal audit. So before that, they're getting audited, but the federal money hasn't come in now. But now the federal money has been awarded, and they have to have a federal audit, which is completely a different animal than a regular audit. And of course, the timesheet issue comes up. And she has a meeting with them. And I briefed her on all of this stuff before I got it. When she took over finance, I explained where all the bodies were buried, shared certain communications with her so she had awareness. But now, they have a meeting. They do the audit, and they get findings, federal findings, because of the timesheet issues. And then this president sends me an email and says, he's so concerned about this timesheet issue. He didn't realize that it was so serious. Why didn't I tell him how serious it was? Because when they got the finding, right, their major funders asked for a meeting with them and let them know that if they didn't address the issues in the finding, they might also pull their money. In other words, if the federal government decided to sanction on them, their other donors, 2 of their major donors, they had another donor, I'm not going to say which one it was, but I've mentioned some of the names already, called them into a meeting and basically said, if y'all don't fix these issues by your next audit, your funding is going to be in jeopardy, right? So he sends me an email implying that he didn't know nothing about this time, how serious this timesheet issue was, and that she, the white girl, that she just explained to him how serious it is, and what are we going to do to make sure that people do XYZ? So in other words, he's now acting as if I had never told him how serious this was, after I had spent the first 2 years talking to them about this. So when the black lady was telling them how serious this was, they were ignoring me, right? And saying that, I was a problem and that my communication, and they didn't like the way I said stuff. The white girl comes in, and all of a sudden is DEFCON 10, and we didn't know. Let me tell y'all something. I went into my emails and I pulled all the emails, and there was one in particular that I had written that was multi-page. It was a long email that I had sat down and wrote all the concerns I had about the fact that these 2 particular people were not submitting their timesheets on time. I had broke down why this was an issue. I had cited the federal rules, right? I'm a lawyer. I know how to write, and I know how to do research. And I had cited the federal rules and told them all these things. I had rang the alarm as hard as I could, and I put it in writing, and I'd sent it to him and the other managing directors and said, this needs to be corrected. This needs to be fixed. I told them what the problem was. I told them what the solution was. I told them what they needed to do. I pulled that email out. You think I didn't? And I sent it to everybody. And I said, basically, what we are not going to do is pretend that I didn't already tell you this. What we're not going to do is pretend that you didn't already know this. You chose not to do anything. You chose to ignore me. So what we're not going to do is pretend that I didn't tell you. Okay? So, of course, I send that email to him, the new CFO, and the rest of them. He gets up and comes to my office. And this was something he loved to do. He did not like to act like, he rarely ever wrote emails. He would always come to your office and have a conversation with you and then leave. But I would always write him an email after he left my office, right? I never let him get away with these little off the record conversations he liked to have. I would always write an email about it. So he came to my office and he closes the door and he's like, he saw my email. And I let him know, hey, what we're not going to do is pretend I never told you this stuff. And I told him I was very bothered by the fact that he had wrote that email to me implying that I hadn't told him. Oh, well, that's not what he was intending. I said, well, what you intend doesn't matter as much as what you wrote in that email. Because again, this was not a person who ordinarily wrote emails, but he wrote an email to me implying that I had not explained to him how serious the timesheet issue was. And so I let him know, if somebody's getting thrown under the bus on this, it will most certainly not be me. You can find somebody else to throw under the bus. Oh, nobody's getting thrown under the bus. Well, that's not how it feels to me. But it's not going to be, I'm not going to be the sacrificial lamb on this, right? So he had to take the hit, as the leader should always do. And he finally made it very clear to all the rest of them that under no circumstances was he's going to tolerate going forward people not submitting their timesheets on time. And all of a sudden, those two people that could never turn their timesheets on time suddenly were able to turn their timesheets in on time. So he had to have individual conversations with them and let it be known that this was now going to be treated as a performance issue and that they were expected to submit their timesheets on time every 2 weeks like everybody else. And all of a sudden, that started to happen. But the moral of the story was, if I had not been consistently putting these things in writing, they would have thrown me under the bus. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to create a narrative that indicated that they didn't know and that the person who was supposed to have told them, me, hadn't told them. And if I had not been consistently communicating in writing, I would have gotten screwed, right? And so even though they had tried to criticize me, I even had him come to my, put in one of my reviews about the fact that I always wrote these formal emails. And he had to take that out of my review because I challenged it. And I did so, of course, by writing an email. Because I was like, what are you trying to say? Is it not part of my job to make sure compliance was part of my job? Compliance is part of my job. Are you saying that I should not require people to follow the rules? Is that what you're saying? Am I being, are you trying to penalize me for literally doing the job that you hired me to do? So we had to take it out. But my strong suit was that I always put things in writing. And so even though I got pushback about it, that there was resentment about me putting things in writing, me putting things in writing turned out to be the thing that saved me, not just even in this instance, right? But in other instances at working at that company, what saved me was writing things down and putting things in formal emails to people. So even when I would have conversations with my boss, who did not like to put anything in writing, he would come into the office and tell you stuff and then go away and then do the opposite of what he told you. He was a person who really was about, he used to tell me all the time, I like people to feel good. When people leave here, when people interact with me, I like them to feel good. And he would lie to you in order to make you feel good, to be honest. He would tell you things that he didn't intend to do. He would say he was going to do things he didn't intend to do. And he would lie to people, right? And to him, it wasn't a big deal. But to me, if I see you lying to people, I know I can't trust you, because that means you probably lying to me too. So I used to make sure I put everything in writing when I was talking to him. And he got used to it, right, in terms of dealing with me. But it was an environment when no one else really did that. I was really the one that would do that, right? And then the CFO who came in, she started doing it too, because she learned from that experience as well, that if they were going to throw me under the bus in that way, they would probably do it to her as well in the future. But I told her, you know, this is what's going on. But then when he got in a conversation with her, he acted as if I had never told him the things that I had told him, right? And then wrote that email and copied her saying, oh, I'm so shocked to hear this. And I wish, we didn't realize how serious this was, and rah, rah, rah. And I said, oh, no. You knew how serious it was, because I wrote you an email on this date, and on this date, and on this date, and those emails are now attached here. And I attached all the emails that I had sent him, where I had broken down the seriousness of the issue. I had urged them to address it. I had urged them to take the timesheet situation seriously, and they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to follow the rules. And they thought because they were so smart and they went to all these fancy schools that the rules that applied to everybody else didn't really apply to them. So this is my story to tell you receipts matter, not just for proving wrongdoing in terms of discrimination at work. Receipts matter, period. When you are dealing with workplace matters, when someone asks you to do something, especially when they try to keep that stuff from being in the email system and writing stuff down, you need to write it down. You need to write emails and say, thanks for the conversation today. This is what I understood that we agreed to. This is what I understood that you asked me to do. Please let me know if I'm misunderstanding any of this. Put it in writing. Don't let people try to have side conversations and keep stuff off the record. Keep everything on the damn record. Keep everything on the record and protect yourself that way. And even when people resent it, you ask them why they resent it. I just want to make sure we all have a common understanding. That's why I keep everything in writing. That's what you tell them. I just want to make sure we have a common understanding that I don't misunderstand. That's why I put it in writing. And ask them, are you saying that you don't want these things to be in writing? And can you explain to me why that might be? And put that shit in writing. Keep it in writing. Keep your documentation up to date. Don't be afraid to have a verbal conversation and then follow up in writing. Per our conversation today, this is what we talked about. This is my understanding. These are the takeaways and these are the next steps. Thank you so much for your time. If I'm misunderstanding anything here, please feel free to respond and correct me, right? Even if they don't answer, they're not answering, basically is a confirmation that what you said is correct, right? So don't be afraid to put things in writing. It could literally save you in the end by putting things in writing. So I hope you found this story time informative and helpful. Let me know in the comments if you did. As always, I'm Anne Marie. This is the AntiHR channel. If you enjoyed this story time and you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe. Come on now, hit the subscribe button. Share this with a friend and comment, but do so constructively. Always remember that HR is your enemy. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Always remember that HR is not your enemy, but they are definitely not your friend. But I am. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Hey there, hey, this is Anne Marie, and this is the AntiHR channel. And on this channel, I love to talk about HR issues and share information to help employees have a better understanding of their workplace rights, and how to assert those rights if they feel that they are being violated. So if that's of interest to you, please stop for a moment, hit the subscribe button, and like and comment, but comment constructively. Now let's get ready for story time.